Success Insight shares the stories of the people with passion and drive who make things happen in the world. Here's your host, Howard Fox.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the author series on the Success Insight podcast. Our guest today is Dr. Lucille Burbank. Dr. Burbank is a successful educational media consultant and best-selling author of The Inside Secrets of Sesame Street, now in its third edition. The Inside Secrets of Sesame Street is based on her behind-the-scenes work in the research division of Sesame Street, where she had a front row seat to what is now a definitive 50-plus year celebration of the historic children's program. Dr. Burbank, welcome to the author series on the Success Insight podcast.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
It is our pleasure. And first of all, I have to say thank you. Just learning more about you and your work, about Sesame Street, reading the book. And for our listeners, I do prepare for the show. So I was going through Dr. Burbank's book. But Dr. Burbank, I have to say, you brought back a lot of childhood memories. So thank you for that.
Well, that's the purpose of this book. It's to bring joy through nostalgia. And why not? I mean, we all experience Sesame Street or Captain Kangaroo or Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. All three are in the book, although it's centrally talks about Sesame Street. And it's fun because these children's programs really impact us as we're growing up and help us grow in a healthy way.
As someone who remembers, perhaps it was early in the morning, I would have been pre-kindergarten or kindergarten when I first remember sitting down at the TV. And we did have a TV, a very large, old black and white TV with those little, fuse bulbs or whatever those things were called. And sometimes I wonder, looking back, did my mom set my sister and I in front of the TV to give her a break, or did parents really understand that there's education going on here? And again, I'm familiar with Captain Kangaroo. I'm sure we'll talk about that, but the impact that shows like this, I mean, they continue to have an impact today, don't they?
They do. And yes, Sesame Street was developed to be attractive to parents as well as children. We have celebrities on like Burt Lancaster, well, we did, of course, and then James Earl Jones and so forth. But also, more importantly, it was written to be, the jokes are for the adult and they're also for the child. So there's two levels of writing. So you've got these old parody jokes for the adult, and then you've got teaching the children certain things. And so the child will look at mother and say, hey, why are you chuckling? I'm learning. What are you doing? And so there's two levels on the writing. It's so it was, and the sound was also very much looked at and thought about so that when the mother was in the kitchen or at a desk or whatever, and she heard Sesame Street coming on, she would feel very comfortable. And so the sound of that program also was very important coming into the home.
It was very much a safe place, I would imagine. I would love to perhaps circle back about your career, because you had been involved with Sesame Street for a long time. And I would love if you could share with our listeners a little bit about your background, just to kind of paint a picture to, who you are, your credentials, and what enabled you to go in and, with a team, obviously, to eventually make such a big impact on the lives of young children and perhaps even their parents. So tell us a little bit about your background.
Thank you for asking that question, because it really is an interesting thing of being there at the right time in the right place. But what happened was my field is educational media. And I found my field at a very young age and loved it. And as Sesame Street was being developed, I did not grow up with Sesame Street, but I loved the show. And I believed in what it did in terms of combining education with entertainment. That blend is so beautiful and making learning joyous. So my doctoral advisor knew of my interest, because when you're in educational media and you work with children, it's icing on the cake to work at Sesame Street. And we went there, and I was interviewed by the research department, namely by Dr. Valeria Lovelace. And she said, start as an intern during the summer, and we'll see if we like you, if what you can do for us. And so I did. And so, any way to get the foot in the door, and that's what I want to emphasize to people, that you just go there with the love, you follow your heart. And so I did that summer. It was a wonderful, interesting summer. And then they liked my work, so they hired me as a consultant. Now, when you're a consultant in any department, you find out and you see what is needed. What did they need from me that I could, kind of tweak and kind of do for them? And one of the things was that they were writing up their studies in a newsletter format. And that was good for some studies, because you don't want to get always so formal, because then the people won't have time to read them. But then there were other studies like the fire safety study and child abuse and so forth that really dictated, hey, you need a formal style. And so I went there and wrote up and submitted a formal report on the fire safety study. And that helped them too. Also, I was meeting with the head writer, Norman Stiles, at that time, and he's written so many Peabody and Emmy Award programs and shows. He was the author of Mr. Hooper, Will Lee, who happened to die after about over 10 years of being an actor on Sesame Street. And the workshop decided, hey, we've got the cognitive stuff done. Let's go there and be honest with the children and talk about death. And his script was beautifully written. So I would meet with Norman Stiles, and we would talk about, you had to make sure with the scripts that the educational component was not left out inadvertently. And you just went there because, it's a lot of humor and things like that. And you just want to make sure that, let's say you're talking about cooperation, that it doesn't break down and you're giving the child the wrong message that cooperation doesn't work because you're trying to be too humorous. So I went there and we would go through the scripts. Also, during the summer, we would grade scripts. We would read what the writers had written and either do A, B, C, D, whatever. And they were very good. If they didn't get an A or if they got too low of a B, they'd go right back to the drawing board and redo the script.
So I have a question. How does a research report on a particular topic, and as you have just alluded to, the topics were very much real life, in this case, one about death. And I imagine today, the topics even today in 2021, which I'd love to chat a little bit about, are equally as timely and the research is important, but how does the research and the report and the review of that turn into or meet up with the script idea, and then eventually a decision is made either to produce it or not produce it, or produce it and maybe have some second thoughts, or produce it and we're good to go, it's going live on a specific date? How does that begin to come together? Because it seems, I mean, there's a process behind the scenes before that episode goes live, and I'd love if you could chat a little bit about that.
Yeah, there really is a long process. The first thing is, first of all, well, sometimes it comes first, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes research will put out a report, let's say on child abuse, and they also do a writer's notebook, and it's do's and don'ts in the writer's notebook, and it gives them hints and ideas of what to write about on different topics. And each year, the curriculum, they add new curricular goals, and as well as having the older ones. And the writers consult the writer's notebook, and then they might look at the report and so forth. Then they'll write the script up, and we'll look at it too in terms of, hey, is it really getting the message across in an entertaining and educational way? Then we'll meet with the head writer for a little while, and we'll have meetings around it. Also, after that, we'll mark the scripts, and then they go into the producers. And if the script is too low or something like that, as I said before, the person has the chance, or it just won't be produced. Formative evaluation is very important. That means ongoing evaluation. So if you're producing a program or an episode, and something is going wrong, or we don't like this, or you didn't get the educational message in, then we will scrap certain things and say, okay, do it again. But we will evaluate it as it goes along. Summative evaluation for Sesame Street was what the federal government did in terms of funding. Is it fulfilling its purpose? Is it educating kids? And so forth. But formative evaluation was discovered by Joan Cooney, the co-founder, and she just was really thrilled with that, because she involved all these people in, and formative evaluation is very important. So we can be halfway through a script, or there was one example I got where they did a script on monsters at night or something, and the advisory board, then, we get the advisory board coming in, and they just don't sit back and not do anything. They talk about their opinion and what they like and didn't like. Anyway, it was shown to the advisory, it was all produced. It was shown to the advisory board, and they said, you're going to scare the kids half to death.
Oh my.
So they scrapped it completely. It never got out of the studio, and it was done.
So this process, this formative evaluation, I mean, this process continues to this day?
Well, it's a good question. You see, Sesame Street, or the Sesame Workshop, who are the creators of Sesame Street, they joined up with HBO in 2015 because they were having a financial crisis. I'm not sure anybody's aware of that. And so now the episodes coming out of HBO are not really as researched as other things the workshop creates. So the
Okay.
workshop creates town halls and initiatives and does this fantastic global reach to foreign countries. And that's very much still the same process, the same research, and so forth. But HBO segments are episodes, they're half an hour long now. They started in 2016. The contract was for 5 years, the workshop would work with HBO and produce episodes, and you'd have to, although there went the kind of the PBS facet of Sesame Street, which is kind of its cornerstone. So what would happen is HBO would produce the episodes, and then 9 months later, they would show up on PBS. But unless you subscribe to HBO, you couldn't see them right away.
Wow. So
Yeah, so you have to look for other specials that the workshop is doing. And that is why I wrote a third edition. I had to graciously say this as much as possible because it really isn't the Sesame Street we all grew up with.
sure.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about the book. I mean, it's in its third edition. What was the insight, the aha moment when you said, this has been a great experience. There's a lot of great information. I mean, you in your career, you have been interacting with really some iconic individuals and that produced these programs, that wrote the programs, that acted in them. When did this idea of writing this book, The Inside Secrets of Sesame Street, come about?
Oh, well, it was really interesting. I did this. What happened was I was getting my doctorate as I was a consultant at Sesame Street, and the proposal I wrote, and I was able to do a bigger study than I had thought because I received a scholarship. And so I had written this proposal that I would interview the staff of Captain Kangaroo, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and Sesame Street. In doing that, in interviewing those at Sesame Street, they were very comfortable with me being a doctoral student, and they were very, very excited because I would send them a list of these people that I've interviewed, and I hope to interview them. And this show is a very people show. It is, if you put it on a spectrum and you have Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which was a one-man show, and then you have Sesame Street on the other end of the continuum, it has a plethora of people and so forth. So they always gravitated towards lots of people. Well, I happened to be there at the time the pioneers were there working on the show. And I said to myself, okay, I'm here. And they allowed me to interview John Stone, who is called the soul of Sesame Street, Carol Spinney, who was the puppeteer for Big Bird, and Oscar the Grouch. And then I sent Joan Cooney a letter, and she got so excited. She said, come and interview me. And then it took me a year, but I finally got to interview Fred Rogers, because you couldn't really write on that show without interviewing him.
Sure.
Because it's such a one-man show. He does everything. And then my mother helped me at that time with getting Bob Keeshan. And so I interviewed all the staff there in New York City. And the thing that's interesting, which is fun to know, okay, the pioneers of Sesame Street who developed it and were so instrumental in its success, they were trained on Captain Kangaroo. So when I would interview, for instance, Dave Connell, who was the executive producer of Sesame Street, I would say, I'd ask him questions about that show. And then I could switch gears and say, okay, I need to ask you questions on Captain Kangaroo. Because all they did is they were trained by Bob Keeshan. CBS had this training activity that was available. And then when Sesame Street launched in November, well, before it launched, of course, the planning started in 1968. And then the actual debut date was November 10th, 1969. They just switched right over. And so it was really interesting.
Very good. And what has evolved in the editions of the book? So you had the first edition, then you had second and third. What evolved in the book, and how has the information in the book perhaps informed how this type of programming for children and the parents, how has it evolved?
It's been quite a process. I did only in 2008, I think 2009, Sesame Street celebrated its 40th birthday. And I think it's all that information was so stuck in my dissertation, and you have to follow a certain procedure and so forth. And I said to myself, they have given me, everybody has, because, the pioneers or anybody I interviewed, they love to talk, but especially Bob McGrath, who was an actor on Sesame Street, one of the first actors, he just could not stop talking. I went through 3 hours of tape. And then I said to him very politely, "Oh, jeepers, I'm out of tape." He walked over to his office cabinet and said, "Look, we can keep talking. I've got more audio cassettes here."
Dr. Burbank, that's a great problem to have, I think.
I think it is too. So what happened is, when I had that problem, I said, okay, ask the question, but let them go. Let them go. I'm going to do an oral history interview, and we're just going to let them go. And they did. I got such rich information just letting them go, and so forth, that it was very difficult to transcribe it, but it was worth it in the end, because I got information that nobody else did.
That's fantastic. And how has the third edition now? What's new in the third edition?
Yeah, because I didn't really answer your question. So anyway,
hey, that's okay. Sorry. You know something? I'm doing what you did with Bob McGrath. I'm just letting you go, okay? But
I know. Thank you so much. But let me recap real quickly. The first edition was I have never written a book. So I said, but the motivation was there. I said, I've got to get this out of my dissertation and into a book, because the information, being a researcher and having a PhD, you are taught to disseminate information.
Sure.
And so I wrote a text-only book, no pictures, nothing. And the critics came back and said, "We love it. We want pictures." And I went, oh my gosh. The Muppets are so copyrighted. I don't know how I can do this. And my mother, knowing me as well as she knows me, she said to me, "Hey, Seal, you can do this. You've got a lot more than you realize." So I went in there and I looked. So I didn't change the text of the first book. So that's why the second book, I did change the title. So the first book was called Secrets from Sesame Street's Pioneers, How They Produced a Successful Television Series. And that text only will go into libraries. But when it came to do a pictorial version, I thought, oh, I'll do a coffee table type of book. And I got such great pictures, and I got around the heavy cost of the Muppets. And I said, okay, well, just call it, because I want to get it out there to people. And the first title is a little bit too academic. So we'll just call it The Inside Secrets of Sesame Street. But it'll be a second edition because I haven't changed the text, and I've just done a different fun layout. Same text, although I highlighted certain text so they could go through and just read the highlights. And so that's why the second edition. Now, the third edition, I said, after I saw what was coming out of HBO, and then there was this wonderful international adaptation that was helping refugee children in Syria, and that was coming out, and there were some new things, and all the data was coming in because Sesame Street had reached its 50th anniversary in 2019. And I said, okay, we've got to update it, because the second edition only went to, I think, 46 years. And you can't do that.
Right. Given the issues that on a global scale, let's talk about or mention climate change. There's aspects of, human rights on an international scale. Here in the US, you guys just had an election in Virginia. There's a lot of issues in this country. And how has a program like Sesame Street changing to address those kinds of issues? And I'm thinking, the obvious, the polarization of our communities, the climate change, COVID-19 for that matter. But then you also have the issues that have been, on the forefront, bullying, self-confidence, tolerance, race, religion, etc. How do you see Sesame Street, with its 52 years now of history and impact that it's had, how is it continuing to evolve with the times to address some of these important issues? Do you have a sense of what that looks like?
Yeah, I do. It's such a great question. I don't know where to start, but let me just first say
anywhere you want, by the way, anywhere you want.
Thank you. Let me just say that they are doing town halls. They did a town hall on COVID, on a pandemic, and they define the word, and they have Gupta from CNN. They do it with him, and he talks about certain things, and they seem to be working with CNN. I just got word that they are doing the ABCs of COVID vaccines with Gupta. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his name, but I think that's it.
Sure.
Yeah, CNN. And then they've done these beautiful things on racism. And again, these are specials or initiatives or town halls. They just go there, which is exciting because you don't have to rely on the episodes coming out of HBO. You can still see the old Sesame Street through these different ways. And so they did a wonderful thing on racism, and they give you, the parent, all sorts of ideas so you can start a dialogue with your child, and you can really talk about it and create understanding. And so they had that town hall, and then they have others too. Now, in terms of bullying or tolerance, well, let me just talk about tolerance. Sesame Street has always taught tolerance. I don't think people realize this. Yes, they know about the cognitive or the intellectual or the educational material coming out of the show. But way back when it started, the thing that was so wonderful about the street is you had all these different races and ethnic groups and cultures together on one street, and they were getting along beautifully. And that was teaching tolerance. So there was Pierce, a professor out of Harvard, that said, hey, we want to intervene here. And yes, we want to teach the ABCs and the cognitive and the other material, but we want to also teach, and we can. And he really intervened on Sesame Street's behalf in the early days, Dr. Pierce, and said, hey, let's go there and let's do tolerance. And so, for example, Bob McGrath, who was one of the first actors, he started out in 1969. And when I was interviewing him, he said, a program has to have people in order to teach tolerance. And he gave me an example. He was at the Newark airport going to something, and this Black girl from behind, or young woman, whatever, from behind the desk said, hi, Bob. And he started talking with her. And Bob said, hey, you must be very smart. You grew up with Sesame Street and everything. And she said, yes. And they were laughing and everything. And then he said something like, I bet we taught you a lot. And she got very serious. And she sat back and she said, you know what you taught me? You taught me that all races, all people of different backgrounds, colors, can get together, can get along together beautifully and laugh together. And I never knew that was possible. So this is the role that I really like to, or this is the role not only of Sesame Street, but of any children's show. That's why I really think that a children's show should not be just animation or puppets, but it really should include live people. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood did the same thing, and then we have Captain Kangaroo.
How are programs like Sesame Street, at the time, Mr. Rogers, the Captain Kangaroos, but definitely Sesame Street because it's still around. How is it evolving today in light of, and I should say, I'm not married. I do not have kids. I have nieces and nephews. They have kids. Do kids come home from school and sit at the TV anymore? I mean, my sense is they don't. They're on their computers playing games. I could be wrong. How is programs like Sesame Street evolving when perhaps the kids are not necessarily sitting at the TV anymore?
They are going into the computer realm, and you can Google anything on Sesame Street and it will talk about how to interact on different subject matter. It still does a great deal of research, because in order to present a town hall or an initiative, it has to do the research to know just how to present this according to the child's point of view, how to make sure the message gets across, how to give the parent, who's the child's first teacher, the tools to go there and have that dialogue with their children. And in terms of watching Sesame Street on the TV, yeah, there are, you can watch the HBO episodes, But I really suggest in my book that you go back and you go before 2015 and it's all over YouTube. And you just Google YouTube and it has every subject matter. And I think that through, and then it does globally, it's still working, but it's still researching because it's still coming out, like, as I said before, with the ABCs of the COVID vaccine. And the whole feeling or cornerstone of Sesame Street is its research. Joan Cooney said that this television program was the most researched program in the history of television, children's or otherwise, because you can't really go there and know exactly how to present this and what will happen from the child's point of view. So we would, in the research department, we would take segments and go out and, of course, show them daycares and do evaluation and attention data and everything. But more importantly, the key thing about Sesame Street is that the producers and researchers work together. This is unheard of because usually the producers say, hey, I know intuitively just what will be right, what will be wrong. I've been doing this for years and years, but not one producer, and I interviewed a lot of them, said, hey, I learned from that research. I thought something would be right on and it was below the kids' mentality. Because, the kids change, even though you're aiming at the same age range, they're changing. They're affected by the environment and these new things, as we know so much from the pandemic. And so there's still that research going on for I really can't state for the episodes of HBO. Some of what I've seen, is just so diluted, but I can say for everything else, any special that comes on, and they just aired the ABCs of the COVID vaccine, that's all been researched with the producers and the research and producers working together.
Well, they did right from my perspective, because they got a senator mad at Big Bird. So, kudos to Sesame Street. I love that. I love that. So, it seems like with, kids these days, they're so much more sophisticated. However, the impact that a program like Sesame Street now, irregardless if that's a real word, HBO or not, but the other special programming that's produced, there is still a place for a Sesame Street in 2021 and beyond.
There really is, because the workshop will go there with the research. And the main reason they research is to keep up to date and to know how to present bullying and the COVID and, how to define racist and race and how to talk about racism. And so they are constantly informing the parents in one way, shape, or another, because again, the parents are your child's first teacher.
Sure.
Yeah.
As you look back in your career, I think you have most definitely communicated you're very proud of the work you've done. And again, the success of Sesame Street now in its 52nd year, that's a telltale sign of, a lot of folks did a lot of things right for it still to have an important role for kids and their parents today. What are the individuals that you're meeting, perhaps a book reading or talking about the book, what are they sharing with you about Sesame Street and the impact, or about your book? Because I mean, like I said at the onset, your book brought back a lot of memories. I grew up with Captain Kangaroo. I mean, I knew about Sesame Street, but to be honest, I don't know if I ever watched an episode until I was Googling on YouTube in the past couple of weeks. But people are impacted by it, and I'm curious what you're hearing when they learn, hey, there's this book out there, The Inside Secrets of Sesame Street.
Well, they love the inside secrets of Sesame Street for the nostalgia, and because it really does give behind the scenes. And a lot of people will say to me, oh, I didn't know how much work went into a show. It's a common thing. People will look at a television show or a character on TV and say, oh, it's no big deal, I can do that. And I'll just deviate one quick point, and then I'll finish answering your question. Big Bird, excuse me, the Carol Spinney, and he was the original Big Bird, and he did edit my manuscript before he died. He died in 2019, December 8th. Excuse me. And he said to me, I'm at a party, and, playing Big Bird isn't easy. And it really isn't, because you look at Big Bird, he's 8 foot tall. And of course, any human being, any guy is an 8 foot. So in order to play this puppeteer, you have to hold up your right arm, if you're right-handed, and Carol was, your right arm vertically, insert it into the head of Big Bird, keep it straight up as long as you're on the air, insert it in the head of Big Bird, which weighs 4.5 pounds. And then you have a monitor strapped to your chest so you can see how you're looking on the set. And then because you have to have your hand in the head of Big Bird in order to manipulate the beak and the eyelids and form whatever expression, tilt the head. So you're that way, at any rate, for as long as you're on the air. And so this guy comes up to him at this party and says, I can do this for an hour. I can play Big Bird for an hour. And Carol Spinney is kind of very polite and, maybe rolling his eyes, maybe didn't. So he said to the guy, okay, hold up your hand vertically, your arm vertically, not your hand, your arm, your whole arm vertically. And there's a clock on the mantle. You don't even have to put anything in your hand. Like, you don't have to hold up a 4.5 pound head. And I want you can just do it for 5 minutes or so forth. And the guy started and everything else. And lo and behold, a couple of minutes went by and he embarrassingly put his arm down. And so you get that feeling, to answer your question, hey, what's involved behind the scenes? And the other thing is, Sesame Street does so much thinking about keeping the child safe, and how should the child know this, and should the child know this? I mean, when we were doing it on child abuse, it was really, really quite traumatic, and just how do we do this? Or even on fire safety, if you show a frame of a fire, that preschooler is going to be alerted to the fire because it's more attractive and miss the educational message. So we had to make sure what we showed in each frame, that it wouldn't detract and the message would get across. So I get that opinion. People say, when I talk about the HBO episodes, I don't do that too much, but there have been some parents I did talk to just privately. And this one guy said, I put my twins in front of the HBO episodes and I put them in front of the old Sesame Street that I grew up with, and their attention was riveted to the old Sesame Street. They couldn't even be bothered with the HBO.
Oh, wow. Now, you shared at the onset or just prior to the start of the podcast that you are in Virginia and you've got a grandchild out there. Are they old enough for Sesame Street?
Oh, she's way older. She's, but you know, she's 14. She just turned 14. She's going to this private school, which I'm so excited about because she loves learning and she wants to be an artist. So they're asking her to draw all sorts of things. But I happened to talk to her about the writing process just the other night. They were over for my son and granddaughter were over for dinner. And because she was complaining about all this homework and things like that, and I was trying to talk about your own learning style and how you get to know that and your own work style. And so she said, oh yeah, she didn't really grow up with Sesame Street. She says, oh yes, I know Sesame Street. I know Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood too.
That's funny. That's funny. Listen, Dr. Burbank, before we head out, I did note that you have another book or educational pamphlet, the 52 Tips for Parents, the guide to your child to safe TV and electronic media. Can you speak very briefly about the impact that pamphlet has had?
Yes, I had to write that pamphlet because being in media for as long as I've been in it, and then now having everybody involved with a plethora of media, and it's all over the place, the technology media, I thought, oh, we need some media guidelines, some literacy, some really easy tips for parents, because I'm a parent and everybody else is, and you don't always have time to read, you just got to get some quick tips.
Sure.
So I worked with this wonderful person who does these tip booklets, and she's done them for a living. And she and I went there and we did 52 tips for parents, guide your child to safe TV and electronic media. And it starts with the beginning, how you look at, as the child's very young, how you look at media, and we talk about the ins and outs of it, and how all children and all adults, everybody, all human beings are very visually oriented. So we give that orientation, and then we go into, as they get older, and then we go into what to do with the peer group and how, because the parent will get pressure from the peer group, or the kids will come and say, hey, I want to have this and that because all the kids at school have this. And so we did that too. Then we talked about some caveats, how to look for change in behavior and any kind of addiction. I was working with a couple out in New Zealand who were really doing seminars on the internet and for parents, how to keep their kids safe on the internet. And because we've got predators and we've got boys becoming hooked at 7 years of age on porno. And so that's where I did the first tip booklet in 2018. And I did this last one during COVID to 2020. And for these New Zealand couple, because they really needed to give out something with print, as well as going and talking to the schools. And it was really good because I updated it. One thing is, will you keep the media out of the bedrooms? Please, everybody.
There you go.
No media in the bedrooms.
That's very good advice.
Yeah.
Dr. Burbank, before we head out, do you have a final insight that you would like to share with our audience. And again, you have this wonderful book. Just the stories the meetings you've had, the stories you've heard, just unbelievable. But any final thought or something you'd like to leave with our audience?
Yeah, thank you for asking that wonderful question. I think at the end, I talk about why Sesame Street is successful and the fact that the people who work on and Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood and Captain Kangaroo, everybody loves their work. And I say at the very end, I was talking about Elmo and the former puppeteer of Elmo, Kevin Clash. And it's a good way to end the book. Because I was saying, is there something else? You get to a point where you're just writing and writing, and then you have to stop and you have to say, what else did I not include that's very important to include? And so I came across a quote that he says when he played Elmo, he would come home tired, exhausted, but it was a good tiredness. And he felt he was doing his soul's work and he was doing what he loved and so forth. And so I end the book in saying, please, everybody, don't waste your time. Do what you love to do, what feeds your soul, what makes you jump for joy. And if you aren't in a job, if you're just in the job for the money and it's not intrinsically rewarding and you're not, getting up and so excited to go to work and so forth, change jobs. Be sure to change jobs because you're spending so much of your time. And yes, it will take a lot of perseverance to do so, but I say in the end, it is worth it. It is worth it. It makes all the difference when you love your work.
As a business coach who does a fair amount of career development coaching, I highly believe in that quote and the importance of it. So I truly appreciate you sharing that with our audience, Dr. Burbank. Before we head out, if you would like our listeners to learn more about you and your work, where are the best places for them to go?
Well, I think LinkedIn is pretty good. And the book, I think going to Amazon and you'll see the third edition. I think, and looking at the third edition, it's pretty expensive.
Dr. Burbank, I'm going to stop you here. Look, you just produced a third edition. That's the one we're going to promote. We'll definitely provide the backlinks to your LinkedIn profile as well as to the links to the Inside Secrets of Sesame Street, the third edition that's available on Amazon. Dr. Burbank, it's been a pleasure to have you join us on the author series on the Success Inside podcast. We really appreciate you taking time out of your busy day.
Oh, thank you. It's been joyous. And that's the way to go.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, hang on while we do a quick close and we can chat a little bit more.
Okay.
All right, folks, we have just been chatting with Dr. Lucille Burbank. She is an educational media consultant and the best-selling author of The Inside Secrets of Sesame Street, now in its third edition. That's the one you want. And really just a wonderful conversation about her role as an educator, a media consultant, and the evolution of Sesame Street now in its 52nd season and the impact it has had on the development of children, the learning, the education, and as well as for the parents as well. And really perhaps the shoulders that they stepped on or stood on, I should say, Mr. Rogers, Captain Kangaroo. I'm sure there were shows even before Captain Kangaroo, but really just reading about Sesame Street in this book and really learning more about the type of work that went on to produce those episodes, the research, the workshops, and really the impact that this book and Sesame Street have had on children back in the early 60s and continuing on today in 2021 and really going on to 2022. So we hope you enjoyed today's episode with Dr. Burbank and I. Do let us know, leave a comment or a like on our Success Insight podcast page. You can find us on LinkedIn and on Facebook on our Success Insight podcast pages. And you'll also be able to listen to this episode on the major podcasting platforms, Amazon Music, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Audible, and especially Spotify, where we have our author series playlist, and you can download the episodes and listen to them. Hey, I mean, we're going on almost 60 minutes here, so this is a treadmill walk for you, okay? Or a couple miles around the block. But we hope you enjoyed today's episode, and let us know what your thoughts are. Okay, folks, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, go out there, have a phenomenal day. Take care of yourselves, your family. Go out there and make a difference. And we will see you on another author series episode on the Success Insight podcast or any of our other series that we have. Okay, folks, take care, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye now.
Success Insight is a production of Fox Coaching and First Story Strategies. Find us online, successinsightpodcast.com.